Well, this is it. The Spatiallabs Eyes. And by the way, members of this channel have access to the 3D version of this episode, which will be in 4K 3D at up to 60p. If you've been following the channel, then you know that this camera from Acer has been teased in past episodes of 3D News and has been teased by Acer for some time now. It was first expected in Q3 of 2024. It was delayed. It still hasn't come out in America, but I got one here to test. Finally, who knows if when it will come out in the United States. They're still promoting it periodically here and there. They're just not making it available to buy here. And for various reasons, including the sample photos and videos they posted online and the specs, I've been excited about this camera. Now, after testing it, there are some areas of disappointment, some areas of good. So let's break it all down. What are the pros and cons? If it's available where you are, is it worth it for you or not? Let's find out. So first off, when you open the box, it comes with a cable for data and charging. It comes with a selfie mirror. I'm not sure how entirely useful that is. And when you open the side, it comes with a micro SD card slot and a USB Type-C charging port, which is practical because most things, even iPhones nowadays, are USB-C. The interaxial is about 63 millimeters. This is a nice wide set interaxial for strong depth. It's closer to the human eye range, like a few other cameras are, like the Fuji W1 and W3, and more recently the Kucam Ego. So this Spatiallabs Eyes now joins this relatively small club in the 3D camera world of cameras approximating the human intraocular distance. And speaking of the W3, it also has a unique feature that the W3 had. It has a manual 3D mode. Interestingly, though, even though you're taking both pictures separately, the left one and then the right one, like a cha-cha, which is a 3D photography term where you take two separate images and combine them later, often used with 2D cameras. But anyway, in the Eyes camera, you take one image with the left lens and then the right lens, which is interesting. So actually you don't really have to move between shots, but to make full use of the manual mode, you would want to move. So if anything, that kind of makes it a little more confusing to do, if you ask me. But here's an idea of how the camera first starts up when you press the power button. And it has options. One interesting option is the aspect ratio. You can choose 16 by 10 instead of normal widescreen 16 by 9. I'm not sure why, but it's there. And it also has battery saver settings and settings to like turn the screen off or to power down completely, and it's set to low amounts of time because honestly the battery isn't terrific, to say the least. After being fully charged the night before and using it for about roughly half an hour, it was down to 64%. The battery isn't replaceable, so it's not like you can carry spares with you. However, you can charge it while you're using it. So for instance, if you had a power bank, but not quite as practical. And as for video size, I found that recording 5 minutes or so equated to very roughly less than 1.5 gigabytes. And now for testing the various resolution and spec settings for the video and photos themselves. First, for still photos, you can take them in either half side-by-side squished or full width side-by-side 4K, or aka 8 megapixels. But honestly, from the pictures I took, it wasn't that great. The sharpness of still photos was still a little soft. It looked lower than it should have been. I think you'll probably get better results if you don't care about video, then I'm sure you could pick up a W1 or a W3 for cheaper if you can find it cheaper. on eBay, and that has a flash, by the way, and a nice glasses-free 3D screen. So if stills are your focus, I wouldn't go for this. They're not bad. I'm not saying they're bad. They're passable. They're acceptable. They're just not what I would expect from 4K photos. And the 4K photos I took with my Red Hydrogen 1 back in the day seemed better quality. Now, as for the video quality and how it relates to the different spec options, bigger is not always better, and I'll elaborate. There is an 8K mode, and this is marketing math. It's not 8K, it's 4K full width side by side. And then the 4K side by side mode is half width 4K, which is still twice the resolution of 1080p. So theoretically, it should be better. However, it depends on the settings you're using. Now, I've said this before, I'm a big HFR fan, HFR being high frame rate, which is typically anything higher than 30 frames a second. In many cases of consumer cameras, that would be 60 frames a second. And this has the option of recording half-width 4K in 60p. Now let's take a look at some of the samples recorded in that format. Alright, here I am holding it at arm's length inside the house, daytime, not too much sunlight. Not sure if the 3D will be too strong to fuse or not, or how the sound quality will be. We'll find out. Right now I'm standing about 6 feet from the camera. Maybe about 4 feet now. Not sure if this is too close. We'll see. And I can't feel my fingers, so probably my cue to stop, but I think we got some good samples. I can barely talk too. It always happens when I get cold. It's like Novocaine. Alright, bye. Now, all those were recorded on a tripod, so the electronic image stabilization was turned off to get optimal clarity. And it actually gets even slightly softer when you turn the image stabilization on, because it zooms in ever so slightly to accommodate for the stabilization. Now, if you've seen actual 4K 3D, which most people haven't, it's only compatible with some screens like 4K 3D TVs, such as from Samsung that they made over a decade ago. I still use one. And in one of my recent movies, New England Seasons, I filmed that in 4K 3D. Much of it was made using a pair of mounted DSLR cameras that were synced later. And just a side note, if you're playing this on a 4K 3D TV, be mindful of the device you're using to play it that way. For instance, I had the files on a USB drive that I plugged into my 4K 3D Blu-ray player, and I activated the side-by-side 3D through the Blu-ray player. And despite being 4K capable, it would only output the 3D in 1080p. So you should activate the 3D on your 4K 3D TV itself. It'll play whatever clarity is displaying on the screen, in this case, twice the resolution of 1080p in active 3D. So the samples we just had, while I like the high frame rate, I love that part, the clarity was just not up to par. It wasn't vastly different than a 1080p 3D camera. In fact, I would say in many instances a good 1080p 3D camera would look better than those clips that I just showed you. So what was it? Is it because of having a small sensor? Is that it, as some have maybe theorized? No, that's not the whole story. The biggest thing here is bit rate, and this is where they messed up. All of these video modes use a bit rate of roughly, I mean it varies depending on the content, but in my cases it was roughly 35 megabits per second. A Blu-ray disc for full HD 3D, that tops out at 40 megabits per second. And the problem here is that that bit rate was universally applied for all video modes, including full width 4K 3D, half width 4K 3D at twice the frame rate, 60p, 35 megabits per second. Divide that by 2 to account for the 3D. Let's just say 17 megabits per second. And now to get a rough comparison to 1080p, in the instance of the full width 4K, divide that by 4. That's less than 5 megabits per second per quadrant. That's lower than YouTube 1080p streaming. And keep in mind, this records at H.264, which is the older spec of MP4. That it's not the one that's used on Ultra HD Blu-ray, H.265. So you're not getting a more efficient compression that can go a longer way. So that's why these videos don't look so great. And how can I be certain of that? Because there's another video setting that I only tried out at the very end. The humble lowest video setting of half width 4K at only 30 frames a second. This is the lowest of all the specs. However, it uses the same bit rate, so it goes a longer way. And as a result, this is the clearest, best looking one out of all the options available to you. You're not going to be overridden with compression artifacts obscuring the detail that can rightfully be there. And as soon as I figured that out looking at the test footage at home on my TV, I was like, oh, here we go. I only did one clip of this just as a test the first time around. So I went right back outside, sun was setting, and sure enough, this is the way. So, is this camera worth it for you? Again, if it's stills you're after, I'd say probably not. There are probably more affordable options. If it's video you're after, there are other options, such as, like I mentioned, the Amigo that records at 1080p at 60 frames a second. So you can get high frame rate there, but it's obviously not going to be as clear as this one can be. I also find it heavier, clunkier to use, and despite me not being thrilled with the stills from the Spatiallabs Eyes, I still think they're easier to take than the stills with the Ego, which would often come out of focus and were harder to take, and even the buttons are harder to press. But if you want decent stills, decent video, you can get the X-Real Beam Pro, which I reviewed earlier on this channel. You can check out that video to see samples from that. And that's a thoroughly capable, compact smartphone size camera. They're supposedly also going to actually make a working phone version. But if 4K 3D is something you want, and you don't have to have high frame rate, and I'm probably in the minority in that. I know there's a lot of HFR dislikers. So if you want 4K 3D and you don't want to deal with the hassle of synchronization, which isn't always reliable either and is quite a headache, such as with mounting two different cameras, then this is honestly your only option. That's why I was pretty intent on seeing this camera for months now, because this is the world's first actual true 4K 3D consumer camera. The iPhone doesn't count because the lenses don't match, and the apps that record that way have serious shortcomings. VR 180 doesn't count because it records in that high resolution to get peripheral vision that doesn't matter where it counts in the objects of focus, which is much lower resolution. So yeah, this is the only 4K 3D camera you can get right now, and the price that they say it's going to go for, 500 and something, is what they've been saying. If it ever ends up happening, then I'd say that's not a terrible price. Now, if the video encoding was done properly, I'd say in a heartbeat this is easily worth it. They really messed up with the bit rates though. So I still think it's a solid contender when it comes to 3D cameras that are available nowadays, especially considering the 4K 3D option. But they did mess up. That's not a high bit rate as today's standards go. We've got cameras routinely recording at over 100 megabits per second in 4K. So to max out at 30 something for twice the data, that's inexcusable. And you can get compatible high-speed micro SD cards routinely and affordably. But like I said, there are other quality options, including the compact X-Real Beam Pro, or even old used camcorders from Sony and JVC, which are heftier but also have more options. And I just want to mention a fact that we might lose sight of. Viewers of this channel are probably more likely to be 3D movie fans, have a 3D TV, and that's the context we're talking about using this in. But remember, Acer is marketing this as for use with their Spatiallabs glasses-free 3D screens. And that's nice. There's nothing wrong with that. It's neat that you can use this camera for 3D video calls, like it's compatible with Zoom. How many people are actually going to do that or have connections on both ends that are going to end up doing that? I'd say the percentage is going to be almost nothing. That's going to make that actually a thing. But I think the really funny part is both the resolution and the interaxial are not ideal for Acer's products. With glasses-free 3D, you're not going to get close to 4K 3D, so all this resolution you're recording is not going to be seen on one of their screens. You need an old, decade-plus old screen to actually see it in its native quality. Or if you're able to view it on an Apple Vision Pro, then you can view it in close to the native quality. And also another thing with glasses-free screens is a higher tendency of ghosting as opposed to projectors, VR, having this super wide interaxial. And then if you actually use it the way they recommend you use it in these marketing images, where they have this camera right up in front of them, where the divergence is going to be so extreme. Um, these are spatial labs in name only. But I digress. And I'll also upload some raw clips from the camera, minus whatever YouTube does to it, of course. But so you can get a closer idea of the original stereo window placement, the original resolution, such as in the case of the full width 4K, and I'll post those later. Alright, there will be more 3D camera reviews, 3D movie reviews, and a variety of other things coming up. So, catch you later.